In this video, I will be ranking every single Battlefield DLC ever released, so strap in because, well, yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover here, so let's jump in and get started with the first entry in the series, Battlefield 1942. In ancient history, before the current hellscape of battle passes, premium currencies, and microtransactions, there were mystical things called expansion packs. These were, on average, very large pieces of additional content for a game, and were usually priced around $30 or $40. Rose-tinted glasses aside, these still exist in some cases, and the difference between expansion pack and DLC can be a bit arbitrary. However, Battlefield 1942 featured two expansion packs, starting with the Road to Rome. Released about 5 months after the launch of the main game, the Road to Rome added two new factions, the French and Italian forces, in addition to 6 maps, 3 weapons, and 8 vehicles, mostly all themed around the Italian front. Even though my PC chugged along at about 12 FPS when playing 1942, I found Road to Rome to be a pretty cool DLC. It added some great maps and vehicles, but was really just more of the same for 1942 with a Mediterranean twist. It's all a bit hazy, but I do remember Operation Husky as an interesting map that featured a beach assault for allies as you pushed up to capture the island of Sicily. I always enjoy seeing more Italian-focused campaigns in my World War II game, and given the amount of content it came with, I can comfortably give Road to Rome a B tier rating, as it was good but really didn't do much to mix up 1942's core gameplay. About 7 months after the release of Road to Rome, the second and final expansion for 1942 came out with Secret Weapons of World War II. This expansion ditched any semblance of historical accuracy for a look at the more experimental and fictional elements of World War II. With a huge amount of content, I remember this expansion much more vividly than Road to Rome, adding 8 new maps, a whopping 18 new vehicles, including some really cool additions like the Rocket Plane, Sturm Tiger, and Flak Panzer, and 7 new weapons and gadgets, which, yes, included a jetpack. For those that complain about Battlefield's historical accuracy, I urge you to remember this DLC. Also, the trailer for this DLC was really freaking weird. Given the extremely unique nature of it and the sheer amount of content, including how much of it I still remember to this day, I give Secret Weapons of World War II an A ranking. It was pretty great. Next, we jump to Battlefield 2, considered by many to be the best entry in the series. Battlefield 2 had an interesting DLC release format. The first DLC was officially called an expansion pack, and the following 2 are called booster packs, which sounds like something more applicable to Pokemon than Battlefield, but let's take a look at the expansion first, Battlefield 2 Special Forces. Special Forces arrived 5 months after the release of the main game and set the bar for Battlefield 2 content that the following packs didn't quite hit. Special Forces was pretty significant content-wise, adding 6 new playable factions that were all, Special Ops, Special Force related, 3 new weapons, including the Scar H, one of my favorites, 9 vehicles, 8 maps, and most notably to me, 7 new gadgets, including the zipline and grappling hooks. Special Forces was, in my opinion, a straight up awesome expansion that added to and enhanced the existing Battlefield 2 gameplay in some really cool and interesting ways. And as someone who was completely obsessed with Splinter Cell at the time, the inclusion of night maps and night vision goggles was a dream come true, and other gadgets like the zipline and grappling hook embraced the sandbox gameplay that makes Battlefield so special. The Ghost Town map was one I really want to see return someday with some fun vertical urban combat and even 2 naval points off the coast. It was just such a cool layout that really deserves a revisit. Given all that added to Battlefield 2's core gameplay, I can comfortably give Special Forces an A tier ranking. It's not quite S because some of the night maps didn't play out super well, but for what they tried, it was still a really cool and solid DLC. Following just 4 months after the stellar Special Forces expansion was Battlefield 2 Euroforce. As the name suggests, it added a new faction with the European Union, 3 new maps, 4 weapons, and 6 European-style military vehicles. While I remember the EU faction was okay, I barely remember anything else in this expansion outside of one of the more novel maps in the series with Great Wall. This map takes place on literally the Great Wall of China. Shan Yu, eat your heart out. And as ridiculous as it is, was still pretty fun. However, other than that, a fairly forgettable and average DLC, this one unfortunately is going in the C tier. About 3 months after the release of Euroforce came the second and last bit of DLC for Battlefield 2 with Armored Fury. Armored Fury was even smaller content-wise than Euroforce, adding only 3 maps and 8 vehicles. And this is the first that goes into the never played category, as I never played this DLC, or at least I don't remember playing it. Reviewing the content though, it seems notable that the maps take place in the US, and that's about it. I mean, this DLC did add the A10 Warthog, and based on that, I would guess this deserves at least a B ranking, as that is an awesome vehicle. Next, let's jump forward in time to Battlefield 2142, which only received a single piece of DLC with the Northern Strike expansion. This expansion really embraced the ice-frosted and chilly setting of 2142, and featured a really interesting detail where soldiers wore a bit more protective and warmer clothing to combat the more severe cold on these maps. Speaking of maps, it added 3 new ones, 10 gadgets, and weapon unlocks, and 2 new vehicles. I don't remember the maps being particularly impressive. While the snowy setting is cool, It all sort of just hazily blends together in my memory. The new vehicles were a bit disappointing given the unique nature of other vehicles in 2142, and the gadgets were just a bit gimmicky, including a type of invisibility that I remember being next to useless. Northern Strike also added a new game mode called Assault Lines that I don't believe has shown up in any other Battlefield. It was basically Conquest Assault, however the defenders get a home base that can't be capped until all other flags have been taken. Not exactly a dramatic mix-up in gameplay. As much as I enjoyed 2142, I have to give this average DLC an average ranking of just C tier. We'll need to skip the next 3 entries in the franchise as none of them received DLC and jump straight to Bad Company 2 Vietnam. Despite the Bad Company 2 name and requiring the base game to play, Vietnam came the closest to being a standalone Battlefield expansion given how disconnected and different it was from the main game. A spiritual sequel to Battlefield Vietnam, this DLC was released over 10 months after Bad Company 2 and featured a completely different time period, 2 new factions, 5 maps, 7 vehicles, a whole slew of era-appropriate weapons, gadgets, HUD elements, new player models, voice lines, soundtrack including music playing vehicles and a bunch of kick-ass songs, and a complete change-up in gameplay in some ways. This was a beast of an expansion pack and one of my favorites within the entire series. The ability to hop over from Bad Company 2 to Vietnam and experience an almost completely different type of atmospheric and immersive setting with the solid gameplay of Bad Company 2 was just awesome. And the fact that it was all incredibly well made was a bonus. The team absolutely killed it with this content, and it's not only one of the best pieces of Battlefield DLC ever released, I would argue it's one of the greatest DLCs of any game ever. S tier. Before we dive headfirst into the DLCs released for Battlefield 3, let's quickly discuss the DLC model that occurred here that would carry forward all the way to Battlefield 1. Battlefield 3 introduced the idea of Battlefield Premium, a service you could purchase that would guarantee you access to all released DLCs, as well as a few other gimmicky perks like server queue priority and battle packs. Purchasing Premium would end up saving you about $10 when compared to purchasing all of the DLCs separately, however was essentially a model to secure purchases before content was even released. Basically a DLC pre-order service. Many fans despise the Premium model, and I agree with some aspects of the criticism, especially concerning splitting of the player base. However, one thing I will say in favor of Premium is that it locked DICE into delivering promised content. There was a service paid for and an obligation to deliver. And unlike Battlefield 5, which we will see later, where DLC was few and far between within that game's lifecycle, a lack of content was not an issue with these DLCs. With that being said, let's take a look at the first release for Battlefield 3, Back to Karkand. As the name suggests, Back to Karkand was a tribute to Battlefield 3's roots as a sequel to Battlefield 2, and brought back 4 of what are, in my opinion, some of the best and most memorable maps from the older title, including fan favorite and series staple, Wake Island. Released less than 2 months after Battlefield 3, Back to Karkand also saw the return of 10 weapons from Battlefield 2 and 4 new vehicles. The maps, as expected, were given makeovers and changed in some ways to better fit the gameplay of Battlefield 3, but mostly it was just so awesome seeing these classic maps given the Frostbite treatment with 3's amazing destruction. While it was great to use Battlefield 2 weapons again and the skid loader was a fun vehicle, what really sets this DLC apart for me is the namesake of the DLC itself, reimagined Strike at Karkand. This is just an absolutely incredible map in a game full of incredible maps, and my favorite in Battlefield 3. I don't even know how many hours I put into a 24/7 Karkand server I found, and having recently replayed it, I still find the flow and design of this map to be excellent. I know it's a bit weird to have 2 of these back to back, and it doesn't substantially change the gameplay of Battlefield 3, I just have to be biased here and give Back to Karkand an S tier ranking. A phenomenal DLC for one of the best entries in the franchise. 5 months after Back to Karkand, the second DLC, Close Quarters, released. Adding 4 new maps, 10 weapons, and 1 new gadget, this DLC ditched the large mixed vehicle and infantry style gameplay of traditional Battlefield in favor of smaller, infantry-only maps. I remember this being referred to as the Call of Duty DLC, and in many ways, that's not really an unfair comparison. However, it was a pretty interesting experiment in mixing up the standard gameplay and allowing those who enjoy close-quarter infantry combat their time to shine. It also highlighted, in my opinion, just how tight and polished the gunplay was in Battlefield 3, and while I personally think Battlefield is at its best with large-scale battles and maps, I can't deny that I had some really good times on these maps. It added some fantastic weapons, including the AUG Assault Rifle and JNG Sniper, 2 of my favorites in the game. The new game mode Gunmaster, which is essentially Gun Game from Counter-Strike, is a literal blast on these new maps, as the micro-destruction was really highlighted here. As novel as it was, I can't say it's my favorite DLC for Battlefield 3, given my own gameplay preferences, however it was still a good time, a solid A tier. Armored Kill was the 3rd DLC for Battlefield 3 and came out about 3 months after Close Quarters. That's a lot of 3s. On the opposite side of the gameplay spectrum from Close Quarters, Armored Kill focused on huge vehicle-focused maps. This DLC added 4 new large-scale maps, 6 vehicles, including the awesome or horrible AC-130 gunship, depending on what side you were on, and a new tank-only mode very astutely titled Tank Superiority. Given what I said about my gameplay preferences, you would think this is my favorite DLC, right? Well, as cool as the idea was to focus an entire DLC around massive vehicle combat, I honestly felt like it just wasn't pulled off very well here. The gunship was amazing if you were the one in it. While someone was recreating their fondest Modern Warfare mission memories, you were on the receiving end of very frustrating and almost impossible to avoid deaths. The tank superiority mode seemed to die off very quickly if I remember right, and I wasn't super impressed when I played it. The maps were okay, but at times playing infantry was frustrating due to the size and distance of engagements. Although I will say I love the variety of the maps, and even years later, Albor's Mountain remains one of the most visually striking and beautiful Battlefield maps in my opinion. With no new weapons or other features, Armored Kill could be fun, but honestly felt just very underbaked and a bit average. It sadly goes into C tier. Aftermath, the fourth DLC for Battlefield 3, was a very thematic and unique pack, and as the name states, took place in the aftermath of a massive earthquake. Content-wise, Aftermath doesn't look too impressive at a glance. Besides the standard 4 new maps, it only added 3 new vehicles, 1 weapon, and 1 game mode to Battlefield 3. However, looks can be deceiving, and Aftermath was actually a really fun and interesting DLC. The maps and features added a huge amount of flavor and atmosphere, showcasing the chaos and desperation of the battles within these devastated urban areas. Soldier models are dust-covered, grimy, bloody, and look desperately under-equipped. Vehicles get the Mad Max treatment with barrels, scrap metal, and scavenged parts welded and jammed holding them together. If you want a taste of what a post-apocalyptic game made by DICE would look like, then Aftermath is a pretty good reference. Earthquake events were added as an almost precursor to the Levolutions of Battlefield 4. I just really love the aesthetic of this DLC, and I believe it added some of the best designed maps to the game, with a really good flow for Conquest where it seemed like action was always just around the corner. The new game mode Scavenger was very unique for a Battlefield game, however sadly I think it died off pretty quickly as every non-rush, team deathmatch, or conquest mode seems to do. Scavenger was a game mode where players started only with a knife and pistol with limited ammo. Gear and better weapons could be scavenged around the map. It was almost like a battle royale light before that was really a thing. The only new weapon was a crossbow, and it fit for the DLC's setting and was pretty fun to use, although I do wish there were a few other thematic weapons added here. All that being said, given the quality of the maps, Aftermath is an A-tier DLC. It's pretty great. The fifth and final DLC for Battlefield 3 was the appropriately named Endgame, not the one with the big purple guy. Unlike the other DLCs, and to its detriment, I really can't pinpoint what the theme of Endgame was supposed to be. More just seemed like a fast-paced combat and a mashing of the last few ideas the devs had before wrapping up the gameplay lifecycle for Battlefield 3. Endgame added 4 new maps, 3 vehicles, and 2 game modes, one of these being Air Superiority, which makes its first appearance here as a jet-only mode that would return in Battlefield 4 and 1. It was pretty fun, although I was never much of a pilot. However, I remember having an absolute blast in the other new game mode, Capture the Flag. It seems like a strange mode for a Battlefield game, but it just worked on these maps, especially with the new motorcycle as promoted heavily in the trailer. The dropship was also cool and really cinematic, and as for the maps, I greatly enjoy Operation Riverside as it just feels really balanced and classic Battlefield to me. Also, Sabalam Pipeline was great because I have a soft spot for snow maps in the Frostbite engine. Overall, Endgame was a solid DLC, but even when it released, it felt lackluster for being the last piece of Battlefield 3 content we would see. A stronger theme, new weapons, and some map tweaks would move this higher, but given how much fun I had in Capture the Flag, Endgame to me is a B-tier DLC. Coming out relatively hot on the heels of Battlefield 3 Endgame, Battlefield 4 released in fall 2013. Also considered by many to be the best entry in the franchise, Battlefield 4 followed in the footsteps of 3 with the premium service model, however had a few other additions that we'll look at here. Let's start with the first of the premium DLCs with Battlefield 4 China Rising. The first DLC for Battlefield 4 was themed around the Chinese faction, with 4 new Chinese-focused maps. It also added 5 new weapons, including the excellent MP7 PDW, 2 of the worst gadgets in the entire game, 2 vehicles, and a return of the Air Superiority mode. While China Rising had a cool theme, it was ultimately a pretty underwhelming DLC in my opinion. It was fun to see the bomber and dirt bike again, but they were just things we had just barely seen in Battlefield 3, and the bomber isn't nearly as cinematic or as cool as 3's. The maps, while some of the most gorgeous in the game, especially Guilin Peaks and Silk Road, really aren't my favorite to play and feature some frustrating infantry gameplay, in my opinion. Especially Dragon Pass, I don't find that map fun at all. I actually really don't like this map. Strangely, none of the maps featured one of the most heavily promoted features of Battlefield 4 with Levolution. No sandstorm on Silk Road or fog on Guilin Peaks, just nothing. A very strange decision, which leads me to believe this DLC was kind of rushed. The return of Air Superiority was good for those that missed the new mode from 3, but really should have just been included in the base game of 4. The new UCAV gadget is the worst in Battlefield 4, hands down, resulting in extremely frustrating deaths. This just might be my hottest take in this video so far, but the more I think about it, the more I just dislike the content in this DLC, and how subpar it really was. As much as I love Battlefield 4, this is a D-tier DLC. The second DLC for Battlefield 4, the appropriately named Second Assault, released just a few months after China Rising, and like the other DLCs, a few weeks later for non-premium peasants. Similar to Back to Karkan, Second Assault was a tribute to its direct predecessor, in this case, Battlefield 3, featuring 4 returning Battlefield 3 maps, 5 Battlefield 3 weapons, 2 new vehicles, and the return of Capture the Flag. Seeing as how superior, in my opinion, many of Battlefield 3's maps were in comparison to 4, this was a very welcome DLC for myself and many players. The return of the Metro Meat Grinder was very exciting for many people, and the new layout of the map was superior in my opinion. And Gulf of Oman is obviously a classic. Caspian Border remains one of my favorite Battlefield maps, and the new updates and visual seasonal change to autumn was really awesome. Fan favorite weapons returned as well, such as the ASVAL and Goal Magnum sniper rifle. However, I don't remember Capture the Flag doing particularly well as a new mode. Overall, while Second Assault wasn't the most groundbreaking DLC, it did bring some really cool changes to beloved maps that were really fun to play with Battlefield 4's new gameplay systems. This is a B-tier DLC. Just 2 months after Second Assault, the third DLC for Battlefield 4, Naval Strike, was released. Naval Strike had a strong naval theme and design, featuring 4 new naval warfare focused maps, 5 weapons, 2 gadgets, and 1 vehicle, with a very interesting and fun to use hovercraft. It also featured a new take on an old Battlefield classic with Carrier Assault mode, a homage to Titan Assault from Battlefield 2142. Just like snow maps, I have a soft spot for naval maps and warfare in my Battlefield games, and getting into boat battles in various entries is always a blast. I really gravitated toward the theme and setting of this DLC, and it helped that Battlefield 4 featured some amazing water physics and effects. Plus, the more tropical island style setting was very unique. Carrier Assault was a worthy but ultimately flawed attempt at capturing the magic of Titan Assault. The spawning system was whack, with attackers able to parachute directly onto the enemy's carrier, and it really lacked the excitement of battling within the Titans. The 2 new gadgets were really underwhelming and unimaginative. I'm also a bit disappointed outside of the hovercraft that this didn't add any more naval vehicles, no boats or new ships. But all that being said, this is a very enjoyable DLC with a strong theme and some of Battlefield 4's best maps. It just gave me hours and hours of fun. An A-tier DLC. 3 months after Naval Strike was released came Battlefield 4 Dragon's Teeth. This DLC has a strong infantry-focused urban combat theme, and its 4 new maps take place in various cities across the Asia Pacific. In addition to the new maps, Dragon's Teeth added 5 new weapons, including the classic Deagle, an excellent MPX PDW, 1 new gadget with the ballistic shield, and new weapon pickup, as well as 1 new game mode with Chain Link, which involved capturing points that were linked together. The longer the chain, the more points your team received. As far as new game modes, this was actually a really cool twist on the existing Conquest gameplay, and I enjoy it quite a bit even to this day. What really sets this DLC apart for me is the quality of the new maps, which results in some of the most intense and fun gameplay to be found in Battlefield 4. Propaganda remains, in my opinion, not only the best overall map in Battlefield 4, but one of the most well-designed and fun maps within the entire series. Lumpini Garden, Pearl Market, and Sunken Dragon are all great maps as well in a variety of game modes. While I do wish we had seen a couple new vehicles and more interesting gadgets, this is a really strong DLC that I'm happy to put in A tier, mostly again due to the quality of the maps it added. This brings us to the 5th and final premium DLC for Battlefield 4 with Final Stand. The futuristic and sci-fi theming of this DLC is awesome, especially for fans of the series, as much of it alludes to the future of Battlefield 2142. Things like hover tanks, railguns, and even an early Titan make an appearance within this DLC, and it's just such a cool way to tie Battlefield 4 into a previous entry in the series, and further tie the franchise together as a whole. In addition to 4 new snow-covered maps, Final Stand added 1 new weapon and gadget, a couple of new futuristic battle pickups, including the Stellar Rosk railgun, and 2 new vehicles with the hover tank and snowmobile. The icy maps of Final Stand are just beautiful, especially as storms roll in and blast snow across the landscape. The maps are some of the best designed as well in the game, with some epic set pieces, such as fighting on top of the prototype Titan in Hangar 21, or assaulting the underground base in Hammerhead. The addition of 2142-like pod launchers adds some really cool dynamic aspects to these maps as well. However, there are some faults, such as lack of infantry cover on Whiteout especially. Overall, this was not only a really well-made DLC in its own right, but the theme and references to 2142 make it one of the best for Battlefield 4, although not quite high enough to hit that S tier ranking for me, but a very high A. In addition to the 5 premium DLCs, Battlefield 4 received a few other smaller free LC packs that I wanted to rank here as well. The first of these we'll look at is the Battlefield 4 Weapons Crate Pack. This pack was released with a significant patch that tweaked a lot of the gunplay mechanics of Battlefield 4. The pack included a return of Gunmaster mode from Battlefield 3, although it wasn't quite as good as its implementation in 3 given that it didn't have the close quarters maps. It did add 5 new weapons though, one of which being my favorite gun in Battlefield 4, the AN-94. For adding the AN-94 alone and with it being free, I'm going to put this in B tier. The next DLC let's rank is Night Operations. This was included with another large update that reworked spotting, weapon balancing, team balancing, and a lot more. Night Operations didn't add a new map so much as it just tweaked an existing one with Zavad Graveyard Shift, a nighttime version of Zavad 311. This map was supposed to emphasize stealth and tactical gameplay, however I found that as cool as a pitch black night map looked, it didn't play super well for me for one obnoxious reason. The IRNV scope completely ruined this mode in my opinion, as it caused players to glow even more than normal. While technically flashlights and laser sights are supposed to be counters to thermal sights, this scope was just too good not to use on this map. A cool idea completely ruined by gameplay elements of the actual game, in my opinion. I actually am going to put this in the D tier. Another free DLC released yet again with a major update was Community Operations. This included a new map, a new weapon, and some really cool elements that we haven't seen in any Battlefield game before. Being the development of the new map, Operation Outbreak, that was added, was actually developed by DICE with support and input from the Battlefield community itself, through a series of polls that built and added to different elements of the map. So things like the jungle theme, landmarks, and name of the map were all voted on by the community itself. This is such a cool idea of how to engage with the community as the developers, and I'd like to see this idea explored again with another entry. The map also added entry to the Phantom program, a community-driven Easter egg hunt that ultimately resulted in the Phantom achievement and bow. Overall, a really solid map, and the engagement with the community was just so cool to see. This is a B tier DLC. The last free DLC and last DLC for Battlefield 4 to rank is Battlefield 4 Legacy Operations. This is a minor free update that saw the return of a reimagined Dragon Valley from Battlefield 2. I'm not gonna lie, seeing this map reworked with the new Frostbite engine and all its little graphical bells and whistles was really great. However, the map itself is just really well designed and fun to play, and a Battlefield classic. Nothing super exciting here, but a solid little piece of DLC. It's another B tier. These next few should be relatively quick, as I have not played a single one of them, but based on the content within and reviewing lots of footage, I will again place my suspected ranking on each piece of DLC for our next game, Battlefield Hardline. Hardline again followed the premium model, the first release of which was Criminal Activity. This DLC added quite a bit of content, including a new game mode, 4 new maps, 5 new weapons, and other things. Bounty Hunter, the new game mode, sounds exactly like Kill Confirm from Call of Duty, with players dropping coins that can be picked up as points. Not super imaginative, but could be fun. The maps seem interesting. The two that catch my eye are Code Blue, which takes place in a nightclub, and Black Friday, which is a less bloody version of Black Friday in real life. Reading reviews at the time, however, this seems like a bit of an average DLC, and not groundbreaking for Hardline. I think it's a C tier. Next we have Battlefield Hardline Robbery, which is themed again around large-scale firefights and bold heists. It added a new game mode, a legendary status, some camos, 4 maps, 3 DLC weapons, and a whopping 10 additional free-for-all weapons, including fan favorites like the F2000 and FAMAS. It also added a couple new gadgets and vehicles. The amount of weapons given, I'm sure, was well received, as I noticed in the base game I didn't seem to have very many weapon choices. Reviewing the maps, they seem decent enough with a good variety and a snow map with Precinct 7, which is always a bonus. The amount of content and larger maps makes this seem like an A tier DLC for Hardline. Next for Hardline was Blackout. Similar to Night Operations for Battlefield 4, this was focused around nighttime maps and combat. This is not part of the premium DLC, but was instead released for all players. Featuring only 2 maps, 3 weapons, and the return of night vision goggles as a gadget, it seems like a cool little bit of content, and with it being free, a solid little B tier, I imagine. The next DLC for Hardline was Getaway, and again featured larger scale maps focused on infantry and vehicle combat. In addition to 4 maps, Getaway included a new game mode with Capture the Bag, aka Capture the Flag, 3 new guns, and 9 more weapons available for everyone, some attachments, 2 gadgets, and 4 vehicles, including a limousine. The addition of so many weapons again just leads me to believe that Hardline was really lacking in weapons at launch, and reading comments at the time, this seemed to be the case. The added maps don't seem too unique, although this seemed to introduce the locker/metro of Hardline with Diversion, an underground infantry map. Let's say a B tier? The final DLC for Hardline was Betrayal, and was themed around, believe it or not, betrayal. It added 4 new maps, 6 DLC only weapons, and 7 additional free weapons. While it's cool they added so many weapons, again the addition of so many and for free just highlights how few the base game really had. One thing I can say for Hardline is the maps are very diverse, with Betrayal featuring a map in Alcatraz, a cemetery, a forest, and a recreation of Grand Bazaar with Chinatown. Seeing as how Grand Bazaar is one of the better infantry maps in the series, this was probably a pretty good DLC, let's say an A tier. The last of the premium model Battlefield games is next with Battlefield 1. This entry is one of my favorites for a variety of reasons, and overall I enjoyed each piece of DLC. Given how biased I am with this entry, it's going to be tough to rank these, but let's see how they stack up. Starting with the first DLC, They Shall Not Pass. They Shall Not Pass arrived 6 months after the release of the base game and added the highly anticipated, much requested, and puzzlingly absent French faction to Battlefield 1. Given their importance and extent of involvement in World War I, the exclusion of French forces from the release is still a head scratcher, but at least they added them eventually. And luckily, this DLC is excellent. In addition to the new faction, it added a new game mode called Frontlines that made a reappearance in Battlefield 5, 2 new operations, a new elite class with the Trench Raider, 4 maps initially with 2 post-release additions, 6 new guns, 6 new melee weapons, and 3 new vehicles, one of which being one of the coolest behemoths in the game with the Char 2C. This DLC contains some of my favorite weapons in the game, the Sodren inertial shotgun, the Ribby Rollers, and of course the Chow Shot. Pardon my French. The maps have a good amount of variety, from the cramped hallways of Battlefield 1's meat grinder map, Fort Duval, to the gorgeous fields of Soissons, and the dark landscape of Nivelle Nights. There isn't a bad map in the bunch in my opinion, and they are some of the most beautiful in the entire game. The new elite class to Trench Raider is also a blast if you can get your hands on it. They Shall Not Pass was overall an excellent addition to the game that improved upon Battlefield 1's base gameplay and added much needed content, but honestly a lot of this should have been included in the base release in my opinion. Still, it's an A tier DLC. Next we travel to the bitter cold of Battlefield 1's second expansion, In the Name of the Tsar. This DLC takes players to the Eastern Front and introduces the Russian Empire as a playable faction, as well as the Red and White armies of the Russian Civil War. It also added a new game mode, 2 operations, 5 maps on release and 1 post-release, a whopping 11 new weapons, 4 new gadgets including the Lance for horseback, and 4 new vehicles, although 1 is a gun emplacement. The sheer amount of content included in the Name of the Tsar is just amazing, and in my opinion almost every piece of it is a banger. As you know by now, I have a soft spot for snow maps, and this delivered in spades, adding to the incredible atmosphere of Battlefield 1 with blizzards, fog, and snow effects. Hearing the character take shivering breaths as you dash across the battlefield expands upon Battlefield 1's already unmatched immersion. The quality of the weapon animations are really kicked up a notch here, resulting in what is my opinion some of DICE's finest work, and it helps that weapons like the Mosin Nagant rifle and Obrez pistol are some of my favorites in the entire game. I also can't talk about In the Name of the Tsar without mentioning the soundtrack. Oh, the soundtrack. Some of the most badass and epic pieces in the entire series. As the music swells when pushing or defending, there's just nothing else like it, even in the franchise. The only mark I have against this DLC is the new game mode Supply Drop. It just didn't seem to take off, and like many alternate game modes, seemed to die pretty quickly. With that being said, given how much I just love this DLC and the content it introduced, I have to put this in S tier. An amazing piece of work by the team. The third expansion was once again a naval themed DLC with Turning Tides. I can't express how much I love the naval theme here, given the setting and time period of Battlefield 1. Even the new soldier character models are just so stylish and cool. Turning Tides was another substantial DLC, adding Conquest Assault, a new operation, a new elite class, 4 maps, 7 weapons, 4 naval melee weapons including a grappling hook and a cutlass, and 2 new vehicles that were basically mini behemoths. As far as mixing up the standard Battlefield 1 gameplay, this DLC did a really good job of that, and some of the new maps incorporate naval and aerial warfare in interesting ways. The addition of smaller airships and destroyer vehicles was very welcome, and cruising around in torpedo boats trying to land those hits with aircraft flying above again highlights the unique atmosphere of Battlefield 1's gameplay. Fighting a destroyer as a destroyer also gave me Battlefield 1942 flashbacks and piloting massive naval vehicles. Every map here is well designed, beautiful, and most importantly, fun. Akibaba is a very strong contender for best infantry only map in the game, and Zeebrugge is a highlight for me with such a unique design of one large bridge for infantry gameplay, surrounded by water for naval and aerial combat. I can't help but love this map. My only gripe with this DLC is subjective, as well everything else is here, as the weapons it added were interesting and welcome, but I didn't really gravitate towards any of them in particular. Still, I really hope the trend of naval-focused DLCs and expansions continues with the series. This is another A tier for Battlefield 1. The last expansion for Battlefield 1, released about a month after Turning Tides, was Apocalypse. This DLC focused on the hell on earth that was combat in World War I, and did so with the use of very atmospheric and hauntingly beautiful maps. Apocalypse reintroduced air assault, aka air superiority, and honestly, I think it was able to play like 3 or 4 rounds of this before it was seemingly completely dead. Apocalypse added 5 new maps, 2 of which were strictly for the air assault mode, 6 guns, 3 melee weapons, 1 new gadget, and 2 new aerial vehicles, plus 1 new weapon emplacement. Apocalypse was meant to highlight the desperate brutality of the war, and this is kind of reflected in the melee weapons, which included a broken bottle, a pry bar, and a meat cleaver. The new gadget is kind of useful. It's essentially an AA variant of the AT gun, but is a bit underwhelming. As far as the new maps, while River Somme and Caporetto are certainly interesting, especially Somme, which features really good and awesome trench warfare, I can't say either are my favorites. However, the terrifying atmosphere of Passchendaele needs a mention here. A twisted landscape of rain, mud, barbed wire, and craters, flanked on each side by fire and gas. This is one of the most impressively cinematic and atmospheric maps DICE has ever done, enhanced by an incredible soundtrack. Knowing that people actually experience something approximating this in real life is very sobering. Overall, while Apocalypse is probably the weakest of Battlefield 1's DLCs, it's still a really strong addition to the game. This is a high B tier for me. Finally, we come to the latest entry in the franchise, Battlefield 5. Ditching Premium, the DLC release model for 5 was, to be completely frank, an absolute shit show. Coming from the large content-filled DLCs of past entries to the drip-fed and underwhelming content of 5 was extremely disappointing for many fans, myself included. DICE for the first time attempted a live service model with Battlefield where content was broken into chapters and was unveiled and unlocked week by week for players, much of which was time sensitive and required the completion of various challenges to unlock. I understand what they were trying, and I like the idea in theory. Player engagement is kept high as something new is always around the corner, and the player base isn't split because all content is free, with a focus on microtransactions through cosmetics, but it just completely fell flat on its face. Some of this I think can be attributed to fan expectations, but mostly I just think the content was incredibly weak and sparse and disappointing. Battlefield 5 was already fighting an uphill battle on release, and this was another nail in the coffin of fan perception of the game. Regardless, let's start by looking at Chapter 1, Overture. About a month after release, Chapter 1 began. Each week unlocked a new item from the DLC, but let's just look at it as a whole. Overture added one new map, the practice range, the Last Tiger single-player war story, a bunch of cosmetics, and 5 weapons, 3 of which were returning weapons from Battlefield 1. The new map, Panzerstorm, is one of the largest in the game, and for those that love vehicle combat, can be pretty fun. It definitely gave a lot of people that classic Battlefield feel that they felt was missing from Battlefield 5. However, if you want to play infantry, I hope your cardio is good because the large spaces between points means lots and lots of running. The Last Tiger war story was probably my favorite from the game, but all in all just a very weak and average first showing of what the live service model would deliver. The capstone cosmetic unlock of this chapter was a gas mask. Yeah, this is a C tier. An overture is something that indicates the tone or presence of what will follow, and this was not a good first impression of the live service model. A few weeks after Chapter 1 closed out, Chapter 2, Lightning Strikes began. Lightning Strikes introduced the idea of timed game modes, and I absolutely despise this implementation. I understand they were trying to gauge player interest, and if the mode was popular enough, it would be brought back permanently, but adding something like Rush, only to remove it after a few weeks, felt completely misguided and put a really bad taste in my mouth. It also punished players who maybe couldn't play during that time for one reason or another. I get it, many modes don't do as well as others, I've highlighted that in this video, but this doesn't seem like the right way to address that issue. Lightning Strikes also added Combined Arms, a mode I've played a grand total of 1 time, which involves 4 players against AI. It also added 4 weapons, some cosmetics, and 4 vehicles. That's right, no new maps at all. I understand maps are a ton of work and they take time, but when they said drip-fed content, I guess they meant it. I really only have one positive thing to say about Chapter 2, in that I really like the Ross Rifle MK3. Other than that, this was just a really disappointing follow-up to a previous disappointment and made me begin to dread what the lifecycle of Battlefield 5 was actually going to look like. This is a D tier DLC. Shortly after the conclusion of Chapter 2, Chapter 3 Trial by Fire released. As the name suggests, this chapter was highlighted by the release of Battlefield's attempt at a battle royale with Firestorm. This chapter ran a bit longer than the previous 2 as well. In addition to Firestorm, this chapter added an additional map, more limited time modes, and 6 weapons, plus a bunch of cosmetics, of course. Let's start with Firestorm, and this might be a hot take, but I really enjoyed Firestorm despite its issues. However, how they handled the release and subsequent support of this mode was a complete joke and plagued by issues. Bugs, hackers, a lack of quality of life updates led to a quickly deteriorating and eventually completely dead player base. Tying Firestorm to the purchase of Battlefield 5 was probably their biggest mistake, as they had the opportunity to become Warzone before Warzone. It's honestly just a shame. I did have some good times with this mode, but it's just completely dead. The new weapons are great as well, including the Commando Carbine, one of the most satisfying guns in the entire game. The new map, Mercury, is beautiful, taking place in a small village in Greece, and plays pretty well with some geographical features that make flanking and other tactics viable. It's so hard to rate this one because at the same time, I had fun with it, but again, how do you rate a completely dead mode like Firestorm? Overall, for the content it included and the fun I had with it while it was alive, this was a B tier. It's good, but wasn't great. Now on to Chapter 4 with a meta name like Defying the Odds. This was DICE's chance to prove the haters wrong and deliver some fantastic live service content to correct the previous missteps. Chapter 4 was a light at the end of the tunnel, but unfortunately this light was attached to an oncoming train. This is the chapter where the slow drip-fed content, the lack of classic World War II battles and maps, and overall issues of Battlefield 5 really started grating on the player base, myself included. This is when it appeared the live service model was a failure in delivering valuable content in a timely fashion. Chapter 4 ran for 3 months, and while it did introduce 4 maps and 4 weapons, was still underwhelming for many players, and I can't lie that I was one of them. As much as I enjoyed many aspects of Battlefield 5, this was really the chapter where I completely fell off the game and switched back to Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 1. The maps are enjoyable enough, but none of my favorite. Province is a cool map, but the scramble to convert it to an actual Battlefield map, rather than the initially intended and ill-fated 5 vs 5 mode that they focused on for some reason, resulted in a lackluster and unbalanced experience. Considering how disappointed I was at the time, this is a D-tier garbage DLC. On October 23rd, 2019, over a month since the ending of Chapter 4, DICE dropped the War in the Pacific trailer, and wow, what a tonal change. Received with an almost shocked response of praise from players, many were left asking why Battlefield 5 didn't look like this during its initial reveal. We finally received iconic World War II battles and settings in our World War II game. About a week after the trailer, the chapter started, and was some of the best, most cohesive and expansive content the game had ever received. War in the Pacific revitalized Battlefield 5 for me, and I found myself consistently returning to these maps. The Pacific introduced 2 new factions, the US and Japanese, 3 new Pacific Theater maps, 13 new weapons, and 17 new vehicles. Not only was this a massive amount of content, but was extremely well made and faithful to the vision many players have in their heads when they think World War II. I know for myself, this is the kind of content that I had been waiting for, and I was happy to see DICE finally deliver. Iwo Jima is definitely one of the best maps in the entire game, and the return of series staple Wake Island back in a World War II setting was amazing to see. Given the amount and quality of the content here and the other chapters it can be compared to, War in the Pacific is without a doubt an S-tier DLC, and set a standard that I wish the other chapters in 5 had been able to live up to. The 6th and final chapter for Battlefield 5 was Into the Jungle. Compared to the previous chapter, this was a very lightweight amount of content, and was basically the winding down plan for Battlefield 5's life cycle. Despite how well received the previous chapter had been, and the revitalization of the game, it almost felt like the final death throes of a doomed live service game. No Eastern Front, no Normandy invasion, no further content beyond this at all, sealed Battlefield 5's fate as, in my opinion, an example of a failed live service model. Despite all of that, Into the Jungle delivered some additional welcome Pacific content with a new map in Solomon Islands, the long-awaited tank customization feature, and 5 more weapons, including the iconic M1A1 bazooka and unique lunge mine. Solomon Islands is a very cool jungle map, and I enjoy how it flows, with action focusing around the central point, but with plenty of opportunities to flank and sneak around. I have had some epic firefights in this map, and it's a shame that it was the last we would see for the game. Despite being smaller, I think this final little bit we did get was A-tier content. I just wish the team had been given more time and resources to work with and really flesh out this content more. And there we have it, every single Battlefield DLC ranked and discussed. I did skip a bit over a few things like the cosmetics added in Battlefield 5's chapters. Most of them are in the garbage tier for what it's worth, but overall that covers the majority of pieces of major content within the series as a whole. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more Battlefield content. Also, let me know in the comments below what I got wrong and why you hate me, or possibly what I got right. Remember, it's all subjective, and we're just having fun with it. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Until next time.